The deafening roar of the engines filled the cabin as Flight WX-407, a sleek white commercial jet, soared above the clouds. Passengers were quietly chatting, scrolling through their devices and sipping beverages, completely unaware that a crisis was unfolding behind the calm facade of the cabin. Up in the cockpit, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Captain Richard Hayes, a seasoned pilot with over 15 zero flight hours, was slumped over the controls, unconscious. His face was pale, lips slightly bluish, and his hands had gone limp. First Officer Elena Morales quickly realized the gravity of the situation. Her co-pilot was incapacitated mid-flight at 35,000 feet over a region where the nearest airport was more than 300 miles away. Elena, though experienced, had never handled a situation like this alone. The flight deck felt claustrophobic. The humming of the engines, the constant blinking of cockpit lights, and the endless expanse of clouds outside made her heart race. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she called over the radio, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every repetition. The air traffic controllers responded instantly, their calm voices a stark contrast to the chaos inside the jet. "Flight WX-407, this is the Northern Air Traffic Control. We read you. What's your situation?" "Elena Morales, First Officer. Captain is unconscious. I am taking control, but I need immediate instructions. We're at 35,000 feet, 480 knots, heading north," she responded, trying to maintain composure. Within seconds, the emergency response protocol kicked into action. Radar screens lit up, showing the aircraft deviating from its planned flight path. Fighter jets were scrambled from the nearest military base. Two sleek F-22 Raptors, their metallic frames glinting under the sun, accelerated down the runway and took off, leaving behind trails of white vapor as they climbed to intercept the stricken jet. Meanwhile, Elena's hands were sweating as she gripped the yoke. She had memorized the manual procedures for emergency situations, but nothing could fully prepare someone for taking full control of a commercial jet midair with an unconscious captain beside them. She toggled the autopilot, engaged the heading hold, and attempted to stabilize the aircraft. Alarms continued to beep intermittently, each one triggering a spike of fear in her chest. She could hear the faint cries and anxious whispers of passengers as the turbulence increased. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing a temporary issue, but we are taking all measures to ensure your safety," she announced, her voice shaking slightly but resolute. A few passengers gasped audibly, some clutched their armrests while others prayed silently. Outside, the F-22 pilots identified the aircraft on their radar and began a careful approach. The mission was delicate. Any sudden maneuver could worsen the situation. Captain Marcus Reynolds, leading the escort, radioed Elena, his voice calm yet commanding. "Flight WX-407, this is Air Force Command. We have fighters on your tail. Follow our instructions precisely. We will guide you safely to the nearest emergency landing strip." Elena nodded, though the pilot couldn't see her, and acknowledged. She tried to remain focused on the instruments, following the precise altitude, speed, and heading adjustments relayed by the fighter jets. The massive expanse of clouds below hid the ground from view, and the thought of landing a commercial jet under these circumstances was terrifying. Every bump, every sudden pitch of the aircraft made her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, concentrating on the immediate task. Meanwhile, in the cabin crew moved efficiently, trying to calm passengers. Flight attendants reassured everyone that the crew was in control, though their own nerves were visibly frayed. A mother clutched her young son, whispering comfort while trying to distract herself from the fear creeping in. Others stared at the overhead screens, where altitude and speed fluctuated, a visual reminder of the precarious situation. Back in the cockpit, Elena faced a new challenge. The captain's oxygen mask had dislodged. She leaned over to secure it, careful not to disturb the controls, and quickly assessed his vital signs. Stable but unconscious, she muttered to herself. She knew that keeping him alive until the landing was critical. Outside, the fighter jets moved into position, forming a protective wedge around the commercial jet. Their presence was both reassuring and daunting. The passengers had no idea these military jets were shadowing their plane, but their skilled pilots were doing everything to guide Elena. Communication lines between the Air Force and air traffic control were buzzing, with every second critical. The next 20 minutes were a test of nerve, precision, and raw courage. Elena maneuvered the aircraft through shifting air currents, following the fighter jet's lead. Each command from the Raptor pilots was executed with meticulous attention. The distance to the emergency airstrip slowly decreased. Elena's hands were raw from gripping the yoke. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She had never imagined a day like this, yet her resolve never wavered. As the jet finally broke through the cloud layer, the runway became visible below, a ribbon of tarmac stretching across the earth. Relief washed over her for a brief second, but the hardest part was yet to come, the landing. The fighter jets adjusted formation to guide the descent, and Elena prepared for the most critical maneuver of her life. The runway stretched ahead like a thin silver line, glinting in the sunlight that pierced through scattered clouds. Elena Morale's hands were tight on the yoke, knuckles white, heart hammering with every passing second. The fighter jets flanking the commercial jet had shifted positions, their formation precise and intimidating. They were her guide, her guardians, and the only link between life and catastrophe at this altitude. WX 407, reduce speed to 250 knots. Prepare for gradual descent. Maintain heading 045. Keep wings level, came the voice of Captain Reynolds over the secure radio channel. His calm, professional tone contrasted sharply with the storm of fear inside Elena's mind. Yes, understood. Reducing speed to 250, heading 045, wings level. She responded, her voice steadier now. She adjusted the throttles, feeling the engine's response as the plane began to slow, its massive bulk resisting the change like a reluctant giant. The vibrations from the airframe reverberated through her body, reminding her that the aircraft had its own will, its own momentum, and she had to coax it gently yet decisively. Inside the cabin, the tension was palpable. Flight attendants moved quietly, almost surgically, ensuring that seat belts were tight, trays secured, and everyone remained calm. Passengers clutched their seats, knuckles white, eyes wide. A young woman pressed her forehead against the window, staring at the clouds racing beneath them, while an elderly man muttered prayers under his breath, holding tightly to the hand of his spouse. The cabin lights flickered intermittently, adding to the sense of drama, while the seatbelt signs blinked relentlessly. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. We are descending towards an emergency landing. Your cooperation is vital. Elena's voice echoed through the intercom, laced with a firmness that masked the adrenaline surging inside her. She glanced at the captain, still unconscious, still pale, and reminded herself that she had to do this not only for herself but for the 408 souls aboard. Above, the fighter jets guided her with military precision. The Raptors adjusted their positions, signaling altitude changes and banking angles with rapid hand gestures and synchronized maneuvers visible even from Elena's cockpit. She matched their movements, interpreting the gestures as if the jets themselves were extensions of her nervous hands. Suddenly, turbulence hit like a punch to the gut. The aircraft pitched sharply, and Elena had to react instinctively. She corrected the angle, fighting against the inertia, focusing on stabilizing the plane while keeping it aligned with the approaching runway. The jet shuddered, groaned, and the cabin erupted in anxious murmurs. The fighter jets didn't flinch. They remained perfectly poised, offering visual cues and subtle guidance through the chaos. WX-407, maintain current glide slope. Do not overcorrect. You're doing fine, Reynolds encouraged. Elena exhaled, a small wave of relief mixed with renewed determination. She was following instructions to the letter, but there was no margin for error. Every adjustment, every throttle movement, every slight push or pull on the yoke could mean the difference between a safe landing and disaster. Back in the cabin, passengers began to notice something unusual. A sudden, precise alignment of the jet despite the turbulent descent. Whispers of curiosity mixed with tension. Some had never seen such skill or coordination, unaware that two of the world's most advanced fighter jets were escorting them, guiding the stricken plane with split-second precision. A teenage boy pressed his face against the glass. Why? Died as the distant runway grew closer, each second stretching into eternity. Elena focused on the instruments, the visual cues from the fighters, and the runway now breaking clearly through the cloud layer. The landing gear indicator lit up. She engaged the mechanisms, feeling the vibration and subtle shift as the massive wheels extended. A warning light blinked, and she immediately toggled the hydraulics, ensuring the gears were locked. Her mind raced. If anything failed at this point, the consequences would be catastrophic, but she forced herself to breathe, to remain methodical. WX-407, you are aligned. Descend 500 feet per minute. Wings level. You are in position. Reynolds' voice commanded, crisp and precise. Elena nodded, even though he could not see her, adjusting the controls to match the recommended descent rate. The plane responded sluggishly, like a colossus being led gently down a hill. The speed reduced further, flaps deployed to stabilize the descent, and the massive jet started aligning perfectly with the runway's centerline. In the cabin, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Flight attendants silently gestured passengers to stay seated. A father whispered reassurance to his child, whose small hands were trembling over the armrest. Others clutched rosaries or prayed silently, hearts pounding in unison with the plane's every shudder. The subtle thrum of engines, the vibration of the fuselage, and the occasional creak of metal formed a symphony of impending landing, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Elena, final approach confirmed. Maintain speed, check instruments, flaps at 30 degrees. You are ready, Reynolds guided. Elena's hands moved over the yoke and throttle with a careful precision, as if each action were choreographed. Her focus narrowed, everything outside her immediate cockpit view faded. The white jet stretched in front, a massive controlled descent, flanked by the nimble Raptors providing guidance and assurance. The runway was now only a few thousand feet away, and every second felt like a lifetime. The wind currents buffeted the fuselage, turbulence dancing violently across the airframe. Elena kept adjusting, holding her nerve, each movement precise, controlled, deliberate. The fighter jets gave subtle signals, encouraging and correcting, almost like instructors in an invisible classroom of life or death skill. The landing lights grew brighter, reflecting off the wings. Passengers held their breath collectively, sensing the final moments approaching. Elena's pulse matched the rhythm of the descending engines. Sweat dripped down her temple, but her hands did not tremble. Every instrument, every warning, every subtle indicator became part of her consciousness as she guided the plane toward a perfect touchdown. The runway lights stretched out ahead like a beacon of hope, sharp and bright against the fading evening sky. First Officer Miller gripped the controls so tightly his hands trembled, but he didn't loosen his hold. He couldn't, not now. Not when 183 lives depended on him keeping his nerves steady. Behind him, Dr. Alan Mercer fought a different battle, one he'd fought countless times in emergency rooms, but never while strapped inside a falling jet. Captain Reynolds' pulse fluttered, weak and unpredictable, like a candle fighting against a storm. Each fragile beat felt like it could be the last. Mercer leaned close to the captain's ear. "Stay with me, just hold on a little longer." Reynolds didn't respond. His breathing was shallow, inconsistent. Mercer knew that if the captain slipped into cardiac arrest even 30 seconds before landing, chaos could erupt in the cockpit. And the co-pilot, while skilled, did not need another catastrophe striking in the final moments. ATC to flight 782, winds steady. You're clear, runway 16L. Miller exhaled shakily. Copy. The plane dipped lower, lower. The wheels hovered over the tarmac. Mercer braced his legs as turbulence jolted the aircraft. He didn't dare look up. He kept his hands fixed on the captain's chest and oxygen mask. If he lifted his eyes for even a second, the captain might slip away. The moment stretched. The cabin fell silent, every passenger frozen between terror and prayer. Then thump. The wheels hit the runway hard. The aircraft bounced once, twice, then held steady as Miller fought to keep it aligned. The plane screeched forward, brakes whining, metal shuddering. Passengers screamed. Overhead bins rattled violently. Mercer tightened his grip to keep himself and the captain from being thrown around. Come on. Miller muttered as he pressed the brakes and pulled the reverse thrust. The aircraft slowed, 70 knots, 50, 35, 20, and finally stopped. The plane settled with a long, exhausted sigh. For a moment, silence swallowed the world. Then someone in the cabin sobbed. Another began to clap with shaking hands. A third simply whispered, "We're alive," but in the cockpit there was no relief yet. Mercer felt the captain's pulse, weak, thready, fading. The descent had pushed his heart too close to the brink. "Doctor," Miller breathed, turning half around. "He's crashing," Mercer shouted. Just like that, the emergency wasn't over. The battle inside a motionless plane. Mercer didn't hesitate. He unbuckled the captain's harness, gently lowered him onto the narrow cockpit floor, and positioned himself above the man's chest. "Miller, call the crew. Tell them we need the medical kit, ED, and oxygen here now." The co-pilot snapped into action, his pilot instincts replaced by sheer survival urgency. He grabbed the radio. "Flight attendants to cockpit immediately. Emergency medical situation." He barely finished the sentence when Mercer began chest compressions. Thump, 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 steady, deep, powerful. His palms pressed rhythmically, counting silently. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound echoed through the small space, mingling with Miller's frantic breathing and the distant roar of fire trucks approaching the aircraft. The captain's head rolled slightly. No pulse. Mercer's jaw tightened. He had been afraid of this. He continued compressions, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Come on, Reynolds, stay with me." Within seconds, the cockpit door burst open. 2 flight attendants squeezed in with a medical bag and the bright yellow AD unit. "Give it here," Mercer said sharply. One attendant passed him the defibrillator. Miller held the radio to his ear, relaying information to the medics rushing toward the aircraft. Mercer ripped open the captain's shirt, exposing a pale chest that barely seemed alive. He attached the pads, one to the upper right chest, another on the lower left rib. The AD spoke in its cold, robotic voice, analyzing heart rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." The seconds felt like a lifetime. Passengers watched from the aisle, crying, praying, whispering. Inside the cockpit, everyone held their breath. Then, Shock advised, Mercer nodded grimly. Everyone clear. He lifted his hands from the captain. The attendants backed against the wall. Miller froze, gripping the seat. Mercer pressed the button. Zap! The captain's body jerked violently. Mercer immediately leaned forward, searching for a pulse. Nothing. He began compressions again. Come on, fight. His arms pumped hard and steady, refusing to slow. He had resuscitated patients before hundreds, maybe thousands, but doing it here, inside a cockpit, surrounded by panic and adrenaline, was different. It felt personal, it felt necessary. After another 30 seconds, the AD repeated, analyzing rhythm. Mercer lifted his hands, breathing heavily. Shock advised. Another jolt, another tense pause. Mercer pressed his fingers against the captain's neck. Nothing. Miller's voice trembled. Doctor, not yet. Mercer said through clenched teeth, he's not done, and he resumed compressions. The passenger who stepped forward down the aisle, a passenger, a paramedic from row 14, stood and rushed forward. I'm trained, let me help. A flight attendant guided him to the cockpit. He squeezed into the cramped space beside Mercer. On my count, Mercer said, voice hoarse, switch every 30 compressions. Together, they worked like a team forged under pressure. 1, 2, 3, the AD analyzed again. Shock advised. Another jolt, then silence. Mercer grabbed the captain's wrist. Wait, a flutter, then another, then steady. Mercer's breath caught. He leaned closer. I've got a pulse. The co-pilot sagged into his seat, covering his face with both hands. Thank God, thank God. The paramedic checked vitals. Weak, but he's back. Mercer sat back on his heels, exhausted but relieved. He needs to get off this plane immediately. Outside the windows, medics ran up the stairs with stretchers. A cabin full of tears as they carried the captain out. Passengers erupted into applause, raw, emotional, overwhelming. People cried openly, strangers hugged, some whispered prayers of gratitude. The flight attendants looked at Mercer with awe, their eyes shining. You saved him, one of them whispered. Mercer shook his head. We all saved him. But the truth was clear. Without the doctor in seat 31C, without his refusal to leave the cockpit, without his decision to stay with the captain during the landing, 183 people, and the captain might not have survived. Part 3 ends here, with the captain barely clinging to life, the passengers shaken, and the world outside waiting to hear the story. The airport tarmac was a blur of flashing red and blue lights. Paramedics rushed the captain down the mobile staircase, their voices overlapping in sharp commands. The emergency crews moved with practiced urgency, weaving the stretcher through the organized chaos. Dr. Alan Mercer followed behind them, chest heaving, hands still trembling from the adrenaline of the last hour. His shirt was damp with sweat. His arms ached from the endless compressions, but he didn't care. Not when the captain's fragile heartbeat still thudded faint but alive beneath the oxygen mask strapped across his face. The cool night air hit Mercer's lungs like a reminder, you made it, the passengers made it, the captain made it. But the moment of relief didn't last long. Doctor, we need you with us, one paramedic said, guiding him toward the ambulance. You stabilized him. Don't stop now. Mercer nodded and climbed into the back beside the captain. The doors slammed shut, sirens howled, and the ambulance sped off into the night. Inside the ambulance, a fading flame, Captain Reynolds lay pale and motionless. Everything about his usually commanding presence dissolved into frailty. His pulse was weak, but steady thanks to the 3 shocks and relentless CPR in the cockpit. Mercer monitored the vital signs, adjusting oxygen flow, watching carefully as each beep of the heart monitor aligned with the trembling pulse under his fingers. A paramedic glanced at him. You realize if you weren't on that flight? Mercer cut him off gently. I just did what anyone in my position should have done. The paramedic shook his head. No, doctor, most would have panicked. You ran toward the danger. You saved a plane in the sky. Mercer looked down at the captain, his patient, his responsibility. He whispered, barely audible, we weren't going to lose you, not today. At Fairview Regional Hospital, the long night the emergency department was ready when the ambulance arrived. Nurses wheeled the stretcher inside, and a team of doctors immediately surrounded it. Cardiac event, 3 shocks administered. Vitals unstable, prep the cath lab. Mercer stepped back now, letting the hospital team take over. He had done his part. His legs finally wobbled, the exhaustion of the ordeal catching up to him all at once. He sank into a seat in the hallway, head dropping into his hands. For the first time since the chaos began, he really breathed. But even in the quiet he kept hearing echoes. Mayday, pilot incapacitated. Shock advised, stay with me. It was going to take time to shake the weight of those moments. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, passengers were escorted into the airport, wrapped in blankets, greeted by medics and airline staff. Some were crying. Others were laughing in disbelief. Several were still shaking from the fear that had clung to them since the descent. One woman kept repeating, that doctor saved us, he stayed up there the whole time. A teenage boy told a firefighter, I saw him run into the cockpit, he didn't even hesitate. Parents held their children close, strangers hugged. A few recorded videos, but the airline quickly asked passengers to respect privacy and cooperate with investigators. Yet everyone agreed on one thing. The man from seat 31C was the hero of flight 782. Hours later, a knock on the waiting room door. Mercer had been sitting in the hospital for nearly 3 hours, replaying the landing and resuscitation again and again in his mind. A nurse finally approached him. Dr. Mercer, the captain is stabilized. They want to give you an update. Mercer stood quickly, hope flickering in his tired eyes. He followed the nurse down a quiet hallway, where a cardiologist greeted him with a warm handshake. You kept him alive, the cardiologist said. Your actions in the cockpit bought us the time we needed. Is he going to recover? Mercer asked. He's not out of danger yet, the doctor replied honestly, but if he wakes up, and we believe he will, he'll have you to thank for it. Mercer exhaled slowly, a weight lifting. And one more thing, the cardiologist added with a gentle smile, there's someone who insists on speaking with you. The co-pilot's words in a small consultation room. First Officer Miller sat with his head in his hands. He looked up when Mercer entered, eyes red from a mix of fear, adrenaline, and delayed relief. You saved him, Miller whispered. You landed the plane. Mercer replied softly. We both kept everyone alive. Miller stood and walked over. Doctor, I was terrified. I thought I was going to lose control of the aircraft. But when you told me to focus, when I heard your voice behind me, it kept me grounded. I knew I wasn't alone. Mercer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did something extraordinary up there. Miller shook his head, voice cracking. No, you did, capable of. You never left him. You refused to leave even when the landing got rough. That takes courage I've never seen. They embraced, two strangers bound by a disaster that could have taken them both. The captain awakes. It was nearly dawn when the message finally came. He's awake. Mercer entered the room quietly. The captain lay in bed, weak but conscious. His eyes fluttered open, and when he saw Mercer, tears gathered in the corners. You, Captain Reynolds whispered hoarsely, you stayed. Mercer pulled up a chair. I wasn't going anywhere. The captain swallowed hard. The co-pilot told me everything you did. You saved them. You saved me. Mercer smiled gently. We all played our part. Reynolds reached out with trembling fingers and gripped Mercer's hand. Thank you, he whispered, for not leaving me to die alone in that cockpit. Mercer squeezed his hand back. No pilot dies alone on my watch. The captain's eyes closed, relief and gratitude softening his features as he drifted back to sleep. The day after the world finds out news cameras lined up outside the hospital, reporters talked non-stop about the miracle landing of Flight 782, praising the co-pilot and the courageous doctor from seat 31C, but Mercer stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't seek attention. He didn't need fame. He only needed one thing, the knowledge that 183 people were home with their families because he refused to leave the dying captain.